Let
Good
me.
morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing all right.
Well, that's good. I think that's how most of us are doing, right? Just all right.
It's hard to be doing better than that.
Absolutely. So may I ask you to tell us your name and share anything with us about you that will help us get to know you a little bit better?
Sure. I'm Aaron Klein, a fellow in economic studies at the Brookings Institution. I live with my wife and two lovely daughters in our hometown of Silver Spring, Maryland.
Excellent. And I'll just add these parts. So you are also a plethora of writings on finances, bills, payment systems, and economics. So can you talk a little bit about that, what your work there and some of the research you found?
Sure. I have been looking at a lot of the questions regarding why is it so expensive to be poor, and what is it about our banking and financial services system that seem to make life so good and rewarding for the wealthy and so challenging and difficult for those whose incomes go up and down, and who need to some help sometimes making it all work. I try to combine in my research very big macro picture trends, looking at large data sets, and very micro level experiences. What happens when you go wait in line in the bank? How do you actually pay for something? When does money go from being deposited on your phone to actually being available in your account? Those insights and research have led me, or that research kind of combining the big picture data and the little person experience, have led me to identify a lot of problems in our system that I think are root causes of the inequality that we experience and often aren't fully appreciated.
So a lot of the things that you've written about are about check cashing, payment centers, and things like that. And you came to Duke about a year or so ago and gave an excellent talk on this. Can you talk a little bit about that? Talk about your talk at Duke, and then some of the things that live around payment centers and cash and deposits and things like that.
Sure. Well, this is a classic example of what I was describing. I take my daughters ice skating in the winter, and at the end of our ice skating lesson in the morning, we walk across the street to our neighborhood bank branch. I do whatever my banking is. They have their kids' account. We do a little deposit for them. They get a lollipop. They think the bank is fun. And one day I'm sitting in the bank, and there are two people in front of me in line. One at the teller, one directly in front of me. And the one at the teller is getting in a big fight. And the subject of the fight, everybody can hear because she's yelling, "When is my money going to be available? Why won't this be available until Wednesday? It's Saturday morning. Monday's a holiday. What do you mean? But this is money. I need it. I'm going to get debited. What's going to happen? An overdraft? How much? $35. What? That's outrageous. Well, what if I have more than one debit? Well, it's $35 per." And she's, "Well, but here's the check. Here's the money. You know me. You know I always deposit this. It's good." And the teller, whom I know, who I have a little sympathy for, saying, "Look, I'm sorry. This is the system. There's nothing I can do." The woman's getting more and more heated. Nothing's happening. Then the other woman walks up to her in line and says, "Listen, I gotcha. Take your check, go around the corner to the check casher, deposit it, come back, bring cash." "Well, when does the cash clear into my account?" "Cash is immediate." "Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much," she says to the other woman, and leaves. And I have a series of light bulbs that go off in my mind, right? What I've always heard is check cashing is an expensive phenomenon that's driven either by the unbanked. Now, there's only 93.5% of American families have a bank account. So there aren't, unbanked is a serious issue, but there aren't so many of them. Two, it's about the bank branch not being convenient, the hours not being located. These are kind of stories that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years. Well, now, in point of fact, here we are at the branch. We're all there on a Saturday morning. Branch is open. People are doing business. In fact, there are More bank branches now than there were something like 20 years ago. Bank branches have not gone the way of Blockbuster, actually, to the contrary. So this story is really driven. The third thing as well, people go to check cashers because they don't realize how expensive it is. Now, check cashing is expensive, but the woman's life's about alternatives. And for this woman, the alternatives were $35 per overdraft. And I started digging into this. And lo and behold, overdraft is a $35 billion a year profit for the banks. And every person paying that is somebody who ran out of money in their bank account. Right? This isn't about late fees where some people didn't have the money and other people just forgot to hit payment, right? All we know about overdraft. And I started doing research about why these checks took so long to clear. I helped write the law in 2001 that lets you take a picture of your check on your phone and deposit it. That was actually required. That was motivated by 9/11. Before that, we had to fly these paper checks all around. I was in Congress in the Senate Banking Committee, and I helped write the law that allows that. But what happened was the Federal Reserve, as a regulator, didn't then require the banks to give you your money any quicker. And people go, oh, well, that's just because the banks like to sit on your money and make the interest spread, or AKA the float. And that's true. People like to do that. But that's not what it used to be. Again, 40 years ago, when banks were offering 10% interest rate, float was a real thing. What it's really about today is overdraft. And this is an extremely expensive, deeply pernicious product that generates billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars of profit. And the regulators haven't kept pace. They haven't kept pace with the very technology that we have, right? The money's there. The checks move much faster. They can. And then I started doing more work. The rest of the world moved onto real-time payments. Mexico and Brazil in 2004 and 5, England in 2008. And the more you saw the United States has a very different system than the rest of the world. We have a slow payment system. We let banks generate billions in revenue off of overdraft. And when I did more research, I began to appreciate, a decent amount of why people go to check cashing, why people take payday loans, is this delay in getting your money. And so that led me to a different set of solutions requiring real-time payments, which I did a lot of work and research on, legislation which Senators Chris Van Hollen of Maryland and Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts have proposed in Congress. I mean, these are very solvable problems. Sometimes people criticize my research and say, Aaron, the real problem is wages haven't kept pace for people, and people just don't have enough money. To which I say, yes, that is the real core problem of our society, the way that we allocate and pay people. I can't fix that. But what I can fix is that among people who are trying to get by with what they have, not to have so much of that gets taken away by the banking system. And that we can solve tomorrow. The Federal Reserve has legal authority, and they could require your money to be available immediately. Right? This law could be passed tomorrow, and it would work. The system would work. Your money would be there immediately. How to structure the bigger structural issues, I don't know. That's kind of, Rochelle, the last part about my research, I'd say, is I'm an incrementalist. I'm looking for solutions that address parts of problems that make the world better for certain people immediately. That doesn't solve the big problem for everybody. Those big structural changes are important. One can be both an incrementalist and believe in structural change. But most of my work is around kind of solving small problems or identifying problems that aren't as small as people think, but we're not talking about or thinking about the right way.
Okay, so I have 2 questions. So first I'm going to ask you just this. You mentioned earlier the word unbanked. Can you define what underbanked and unbanked means for those who may not be familiar with those terms?
So unbanked means you or nobody in your household has a bank or credit union account. 6.5% of American households, or roughly 8.5 million people, do not have an account with a bank or a credit union. Unbanked. Underbanked means you have a bank account, but you use some part of the non-banking system for what we would consider a basic banking need: a check casher, a payday lender, a wire transmitter like Western Union or MoneyGram. The underbanked is between 20 and 25%. 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 people in America are underbanked. So this group is, 3 to 4 times larger than the unbanked. And when you add them together, you're nearly 30%, nearly 1 in 3 Americans are either unbanked or underbanked. Some of my solutions, I think, can help the unbanked, and some of my research focuses on that. But more of my work and solutions that I'm proposing focus on the underbanked, the 1 in 4, 1 in 5 Americans who have a bank account, but the system isn't working for them. It's becoming very costly, and it's pushing them out of the system.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. So my next question is a little bit about where we are in this pandemic, right? So in 2009, the federal government bailed out the bank, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to bail out the banks. So this time we have COVID is running rampant everywhere across the planet. And the government again came to the bank's side. Almost all industry got money for banks, while individuals got $1,200 or unemployment. Those are the only two things that they got, one of the two. And I think in some states, if you got the stimulus check from the government, you couldn't use unemployment. So there were all these kind of guidelines that kind of smashed in each other to ensure the poor. We're punishing the poor for being poor. And the poor right now is no longer just black and brown people. The poor are a lot of people. They're in, retail industries, hospitality industries. So where is that going? So we can't sustain what we're doing right now very long. So the financial crash of 2009, looks very different than what it looks like now, but our response to it seems to be different. Is there some logic to why it looks so different from 2009 to the way it looks in 2020?
So, Rochelle, you raise a lot of very good points, and I think we've made a giant mistake in the current response, which is that we financialized the fiscal policy response. That is, we didn't give enough money to people and families in need. We gave tons of money to the financial system to unfreeze markets.
Right.
And the way that I view the economy and the way that I view these two recessions, 2009, the problem was the financial markets.
Mm-hmm.
The cause of the recession, the infection in our economy was in the financial markets, which then went through the banks and affected the real economy.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2009, and I worked on these bills, I helped write and then I helped implement. I helped write in Congress and then went into the Obama administration and helped implement the TARP program, which was passed in the Bush administration, requested by President Bush, started to be enacted by President Bush, 2008. That, if you were a doctor, the diagnosis of the problem was the financial markets, and the transmission mechanism were the banks, and it infected the real economy, and we financialized our response. I will point out, we lent money to the banks in 2009. The banks paid us back with a profit for the taxpayer. The taxpayer got more money back in TARP from the banks than they lent out. So we didn't lose money. We subsidized them. We bailed them out. I agree with that. But it was a loan and we got our money back. In this recession, the root cause is a disease.
Right.
The disease infects people. People then infected, or because they're afraid of being infected, or because the government is trying to control the transmission, pull back from economic activity, and the economy then suffers. Because the economy is suffering and because financial markets don't know how to figure out the problem and the disease, we then get a problem in markets. The problem is the disease. The infection mechanism are people. and the result impacted are the economy as well as families and finally markets. It's insane that we turned around and grabbed the same toolkit from 2009 and financialized this response by running to the Federal Reserve and saying, go lend money to companies. And, the Fed took a long time to do it. And now they're lending to Apple.
Right.
Does anybody here think that Apple has a problem?
None whatsoever.
Right? And this is a mistake. I think we're making this mistake in part because we're just turning to the problem in 2009 that, in my opinion, was a very painful and deep recession, but it was a lot better than it could have been without those policies.
Right.
I will add one last thing, and this makes kind of the drafting of public policy versus the selling of it. Congress put has spent $510 billion in this Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP. It was sold to the American people as loans to small businesses to protect workers' paychecks.
Right.
In point of fact, they're not loans,
Right.
they're grants.
Grants.
As long as the business uses it to pay originally 75, now 60% of salaries, the other 40% can go to rent and to pay to other businesses.
Right.
By the way, when they have to pay, they could be paying themselves as the owner or other things.
Right. Right.
So it wasn't loans, it was grants. It wasn't small businesses, right? The Lakers qualify.
Right.
Right.
Airlines.
Share Shack. Well, and the PPP, it was Shake Shack, Five Guys.
Right.
Right. I mean, Ruth Chris Steakhouse.
Right.
Very, very big company. My favorite was Francis Ford Coppola, the winemaker and the director of The Godfather.
Right.
Right. Kanye West got money for
Right.
his clothing line. My favorite band, Fish. Right. A lot of different people qualify.
Right.
So what we did was we sold to the American public loans to small businesses, and what we delivered were grants to, I don't know, I mean, would you call Kanye a small business? Would you call the LA Lakers a small business? Would you call Francis Ford Coppola, the Godfather, the vineyard maker? No, right? In point of fact, we made the Godfather an offer that he couldn't refuse.
Exactly.
And, I feel, and I sympathize with your core point, which is that for people, it feels like I got $1,200 and these people got,
millions
out.
Yeah.
And they're right.
Right. Okay. So then the other side of this, and I realize we don't have much time, but I really do. And Aaron, I think we're going to have to do this again because there's so much more to talk about, but I do want to raise one point. So if you go back from 1619 to where we are 2020, and this is specifically Black and brown communities, but more Black than brown, there was the America that exists today was built on the backs of enslaved people, right? So the economic system that we have is built on the backs of that. The cotton and sugar and rice and all these things made these plantation owners profitable. What they did in the North, I'm not so sure, but whatever it is, this is how we got here. And today, in 2020, we're getting ready to be in 2021 in a few minutes. Black people
not soon enough.
Right. Black people are struggling still. We're not on par equitably. We don't get the same jobs. We're not paid the same amount. And I can tell you as a Black woman, I have real life examples of where I have more experience, more education, and I'm still paid less, right? I still report to a white man who can barely see me, right? Because if he doesn't agree with what I say, he begins chastising me or punishing me for this. This is my real life. I have a doctorate degree. I'm educated. I'm experienced. I'm well connected. I have very good relationships, but yet still I am on the back burner about to fall off the stove. And if I can fall off the stove, you can imagine what those people that are at or below poverty are. So why does the system continue to disadvantage people of color? And I would just add this one little piece. People don't talk about reparations. So can you kind of mash all that together and kind of give us an explanation as to why things are the way they are?
Sir, certainly. Well, let me just focus on the one kind of sliver that I think about a lot, which has to do with the allocation of credit and the banking and financial system.
Yeah.
I think the way things are a couple of things. Number one, people, particularly people in power, don't put themselves in the shoes of the actual experience of other people.
Right.
And so I take everything you say and am deeply impacted by your experience. I try to appreciate as much as I can. Obviously, I've had very different experiences in my life. I do come from and grew up in Maryland, which, as you well know, is a slave state, and much of the economic wealth that was created in Maryland. Now, my family came much later to this country. That being said, two things I think really jump out. One is the inability of policymakers to put themselves in the shoes of real people. When I told my story about the bank to many people, they said, well, why didn't she have direct deposit? Why didn't, they immediately started blaming this woman. By the way, what I didn't say in the beginning of the story is both the women in my bank branch were African-American women. Right? Which one of the things made me think, like, here I go into this story and there are three people in a bank branch, a woman with this problem, a woman who knows how to solve it, and a person who thinks they're a banking expert. Right? And I realized I knew nothing about the actual life these people are having. You wouldn't believe the answers I've been told on this payment problem. It's almost, in the French Revolution, where the Queen of France said, well, the peasants don't have bread, we'll let them eat cake.
Yeah.
Here it's let them eat credit.
Right.
What do you mean they don't have money? Well, just spend it on your credit card and you can wait till the end of the month to pay them off.
Right.
People who are so off. So one is just a deep failure to understand the reality of life, because we do live in very separate universes. One. Two, let's start with the allocation of credit. The most important factor in your credit system is this thing called FICO, which is essentially your credit score. And that's a number. It's meant to look like the SAT in a way to kind of try to confuse people or make it more accessible. This number is, in my opinion, pretty correlated. It's based on an outmoded system, which is if you've ever had a problem in the past, then you're less creditworthy in the future.
Amen. Yep.
The data on that is not so clear, right? The data on that is a lot more like, if you had financial problems, you're going to have a problem. If you're doing okay, you're going to be okay.
Right.
We have laws in our books that prevent using data that has a disparate impact on communities of color. But those laws grandfathered in the existing system. Right? And there's a tension, as you well know and just pointed out. Black people are paid less than white people. They make less money than white people.
Right. Less access, less opportunity.
Right. Same with men and women.
Yep.
But it is a fair criteria to use how much money you have in terms of whether or not I should lend to you or what rate I should send back.
Right.
But because we grandfather in existing systems like FICO, but we hold new systems to a very high standard of not having disparate impact. And I think that functions to reduce progress, because all it does is benefit the existing system. Now, if you open it up a little bit and let newer systems come in and compete and perhaps do better, you can end up with a better system than what we have today. But that new system will still have bias.
Right.
Because it's being built on the backs of everything that you've described from 1619 on forward.
Yep.
And that is a difficult conversation for policymakers to have. To sit down and you and I to say, look, I have this new system and people of color are going to get I'm making these numbers up, they're going to be a 10% penalty versus a 20% penalty. And you can come back to me and say, we shouldn't have it. That's completely unfair. And I can turn to you and say, I've just cut bias in half.
Right.
Which one do you want?
Right.
And so I think that, one thing I'm hopeful that we can turn this, moment and opportunity where we're having more difficult and honest conversations into an opportunity to have that space, because without that kind of space, it's very easy to shoot down anything new.
Right.
But if you shoot down the new, you're left with what we have.
Yeah.
And that ain't that great.
That ain't that great. But you know, one of the things that I find amazing about money, in regards to what kind of, whether it's cash, Bitcoin, whatever it is, there is a little fine print that's at the bottom of every single piece of it, right? So, no matter what it is, you read the fine print. And so, for example, you see these commercials advertising this thing for mobile Wi-Fi service or advertising whatever this thing, and people don't read that little fine print. And so when you go to Apple and you buy your beautiful phone, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, but there's some fine print that you did not read, which then allows the person who you bought this phone from, the people who you interact with, to monitor your behavior, right? So where are you? So my SIM card will tell whether I'm in Durham or I'm in Maryland, right? My SIM card will tell how many apps I opened or what I did. And I think the problem for me is where we are with technology, and emerging technologies are coming fast. So cashier of the stores, all these things that are coming fast, it's going to further disrupt the poor, punish the poor, criminalize the poor, And so, and at this point, I don't think we're just talking Black and brown people. I think we're talking about people who are in very unbalanced situations where, they can live paycheck to paycheck, right? So, what is the answer to that? And I realize you have to go, but I mean, I want to say, Aaron, please, let's continue this conversation in August or September when you have another few minutes. But I think there's so much that we need to understand. Black and brown people need to understand about money, credit, FICO scores and all these other things. And there's no place you can go get that. So I don't care what university, Harvard, the best in the world, they do not teach Finance 101 for poor people. And that needs to be a class. It really does. What is credit, and how do you maintain your credit? So, sorry.
Well, I appreciate that. We tried with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, look it up. They have some good financial literacy, financial education. So does the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And people can be able to get knowledgeable. But real quick before I go, I agree with your point. We have one of the predicates of our consumer protection regime is disclosure, which has broadly failed us.
Right.
I click accept to iTunes. I don't know what I'm accepting.
Exactly.
This idea that your credit card disclosure, that thing you get in the mail on your card, trash.
Right.
I worked on a bill, by the way, to make it so that if your consumer disclosure doesn't change, the law wrote in the law they had to mail it to you every year. Right. And we said, look, if nothing changes, can you just post it online?
Right.
And do you know who opposed it? The paper industry.
Right, because they couldn't kill enough trees.
Correct. And by the way, it took years. It was a bipartisan bill. It took years. But one of the arguments was, people need these disclosures. There are some disclosures people need.
Right.
But the idea that you can disclose your way out of complexity, out of things that regular people can't possibly understand.
Right.
And that when you start with the idea of a simple disclosure and it goes through the lawyers, that you come out with a simple disclosure. And we need to rethink that regime because it has been a, broadly speaking, failed regime. And a lot of disclosure that's written for 8.5 by 11 paper doesn't translate into 3.5 by 1 screen.
Right. Right.
And we have to realize the future of the world is not loose leaf paper.
Right. Nope, not at all. It's technology. Aaron, thank you so much for this. I'm still going to harass you about my non-residential Brookings Fellowship that you're going to help me get. I just know that you're going to work on this for me. But I hope we can talk in August again to continue this conversation. Thank you so much. As soon as the video is converted, I will send you a link to it so you can look at it and let me know if we can upload it.
My great pleasure. Thank you very much, Rochelle.
Thank you so much. Bye.